I open the door and see the stranger. Hello. His eyes are hooded, lids falling heavy like both they and he have been brought low by life. A gaunt echo of elegance haunts his pale face, as if he has somehow broken through from a better, more classical time, and the shock of our modern-day inadequacies has come close to breaking him too. Hello, I reply. I cannot tell what he thinks of me. I can scarcely say whether he sees me at all. Kathleen, meet Gavin. Tambi springs out from behind the stranger's back, bounding up to my door with characteristically uncontained exuberance. My first publisher, as well as my first friend in London. MJT Tambi Muto's eccentricities may be irritating to many. Who else goes out for milk and returns 3 days later, minus his shoes? But as the only person who believed in me from the start, believed, more fundamentally, in the poetry that makes up the woman I feel to be the real me, I am usually ready to indulge him. As, it appears, I must do again. Gavin's a portrait painter. Tambi pushes forward the taller, thinner man until he has one foot resting on my threadbare excuse for a doormat. Like his face, his figure looks wretched, and I wonder fleetingly how a person can be so slim and still standing. He's going to paint you. Gavin looks horrified at the thought. Alarmed too, as if this is his first time hearing about any such plan. Knowing Tambi and his whimsical ways, the prospect is very much plausible. Come on, Kathy, he play whines, hopping theatrically from soul to soul. We're getting cold out here. It's still August, Tambi. Let us in, there's a good girl. Tambi, it's not quite Am I the only writer who must ask her publisher not to disturb her while she's working? Heaven knows I'm often happy enough to encounter a distraction. But after last week's trip, I can feel new verses emerging, the hazy shape of novel sentences tentatively finding their forms. Experienced enough in the art and agony of composition to recognise it as a rare sensation, I must not squander it. But Gavin writes poetry too, don't you? Tambi gives Gavin another enthusiastic nudge that almost knocks the man over entirely. Isn't it perfect? All three of us are now clustered on the Paulton Square threshold, pressed together by the meagre limits of my four walls. Tambi, really, he also hunts sharks. Does he? It would take a more generous hallway than mine to accommodate all this confusion. Is that true? I'm afraid so, Gavin answers. It was true, at any rate. His voice sounds aristocratic, far more than my own. And yet even in those few syllables, I hear the hint of an accent buried beneath the surface, a raw and gentle, almost tragic minor melody that beckons me back to some place I cannot remember forgetting. The familiarity should be unnerving in a man I do not know, but it serves only to deepen the sense, as intense as it is illogical, that a part of me already knows him. Why, I ask? Why would anyone want or need to hunt a shark? Money, Gavin says acerbically. That was the idea, if neither result nor reality. The sarcasm seems to animate him. His eyes open momentarily, a spark of life alight as he checks how well his self-mockery has been received. Blue, I see clearly for the first time. His eyes are blue, cool and oceanic. Presumptuous as it might be, I feel inexplicable pride in myself at having coaxed even the weakest suggestion of interest, in having roused him, however briefly, from the depressive torpor in which he appears trapped. The feeling encourages me to push away the ghastly, ghoulish mental image of sharks run through with spears or, I dare not ask the technicalities, suffocated to slow and torturous deaths by thick-knotted fishing nets. But it can't really be like that, I tell myself while, at the impassioned behest of Tambi, Gavin takes a seat in my small living room. This man does not look capable of cruelty. Drink? I offer with knee-jerk politeness. Poet or painter, I've never known a creative of my acquaintance to refuse. Whiskey! Tambi shouts. Gavin stays silent, but he looks less horrified than before. I retreat gladly into my tiny galley kitchen and scour my ill-stocked cupboards for a lonely, unimpressive bottle of scotch tucked into a corner. Returning with 3 glasses, I permit Tamby to pour. Because his measures are more generous, of course. Not because I suddenly feel unsteady. To my 2 favourites, Tamby salutes us, droplets spilling as his hand swings from Gavin to me and back again. Gavin nods, not quite smiling, and downs his drink in one. Better leave the bottle, Tamby laughs. I do so, and Gavin pours his second himself. After several minutes of stilted chit-chat, a little between Gavin and me, a lot with Tamby playing angel and devil's advocate to himself, it is suggested, and then commanded, that Gavin should take my photograph. To paint from, Tamby asserts, unaware that behind him Gavin's ashen face has turned green. We're going to do an exhibition, aren't we? Famous faces of the 50s. And of course I said to Gavin, I know the woman for you, sir. The great Kathleen Raine, poetess and my personal friend. Meant to be, eh? Not quite. Every muscle in my face tightens at the thought of being photographed or painted. This plan might have appealed to me in my youth, before my children, when beauty brought me the attention I thought equated with respect. These days, I have a hatred of being captured. With all the preening and posing involved, most photographs only serve to remind me of the aspects of life that I most detest, its coarseness and materiality, the murky waters I want my work to transcend. No picture I can think of has ever depicted a true encounter of souls. A photograph has never successfully preserved the precise moment of spirit meeting spirit. Yet by the time I've composed my objections, the camera, produced from Tamby's rather than Gavin's bag, is already teetering on its spindle-legged tripod, the disinterested eye of its lens pointing towards me. Gavin bends behind it without saying a word. The click comes. Thank you, he whispers in the same sad, melodic voice as before. A strange combination of notes, certainly, but they suit his appearance. Refinement veiled in sadness. Now the garden. Tamby leaps from the sofa with energy most mortals would demonstrate only if electrified. Kathleen's pear tree is a beautiful specimen. You both love trees, don't you? So calming. Without waiting for answers, Tamby takes to shepherding us out of the living room, driving us onward like an overexcited collie. My mind turns to hardy sheepdog, young George. Sharing a Christian name with my father makes the poor creature feel even less auspicious, who pushed the sheep in his charge over a cliff through sheer, short-sighted enthusiasm. Nevertheless, soon we are indeed standing in front of the Polton's pear tree. Number 9 represents one of the rare strokes of luck I've had since moving to London, and one for which I'm grateful every day. The interior of the house is light and bright, if somewhat lacking in elegance and, I'm afraid to say, more tattered than when I moved in. But it is the outside, the small, sweet garden of solitude, I cherish most. Without a green space to retreat to, however modest, I cannot be imagined being able to create. If only it were an apple tree, Tamby chortles as he pushes us together with one hand on my right shoulder and the other on Gavin's left. Then the two of you would be like Adam and Eve. Still, a pair in front of the pear tree. Kathleen, you must write that down. It'd be delightful in a poem. If you two will stand like so. No, says Gavin. Quiet but firm. Even Tamby stops to listen. The camera has a timer. We'll take the 3 of us at once. Tamby shrugs, smiles and bounces over to my right, his head lolling a little towards my shoulder. He never could take his whiskey. I stare straight, impassive as I can, while Gavin walks away to set the timer before returning to my left side. His torso presses lightly against mine, and the sensation takes me by surprise, one of strength, muscular and almost sculptural, despite his being so cadaverously thin. Down but not out is the idiom in my head while we wait for the camera shutter to snap in near silence. Tamby is singing softly. This stranger may have been beaten up by life, but he has not yet broken down by it. For a second or so, I sense Gavin's right arm reaching over my shoulder. The click comes. I look up. His fingers are wrapped around a trailing pear tree branch, floating in space barely an inch above my collar. His arm, although so near, was never around me, after all.